Next, I have the pleasure and excitement to introduce two very special entrepreneurs of St. Joseph who have had a great influence on our community. If you will both come up while I read your impressive bios, Steve and Joe. Steve Craig was born in St. Joseph and graduated from Savannah High School. He got a start in business operating fireworks, by the way, around the St. Joseph area. He left the area to pursue his education and career, graduating from the University of Southern California. Steve is a founding partner, president, and CEO of Craig Realty Group, based in Newport Beach, California. His generosity has had huge impact on the St. Joseph region, nowhere more than here at Missouri Western, who, among other things, he established the accredited AACSB Stephen L. Craig School of Business, started and continues to support the Center for Entrepreneurship, as well as the Center for Franchise Development. We appreciate Steve's support tremendously. Steve will be joined on stage by Joe Gray. Like Steve, Joe was born in St. Joseph. Joe has spent most of his life here after graduating from Missouri Western's forerunner, St. Joseph Junior College, in 1942. He earned a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Engineering from the University of Kansas in 1944. After service in the Navy and defense-related jobs in Baltimore and at the Pentagon, Joe returned to St. Joseph and co-founded Gray Manufacturing in 1952. The family-owned lift jack manufacturer continues to thrive today as a key element in St. Joe's economy. Joe currently serves as chairman emeritus of both Gray Manufacturing and Vectech of Emporia, Kansas, a company he founded in 1974 and sold in 2016. In addition to his success as a businessman, Joe has been an active member of the St. Joseph community, serving as Chamber of Commerce president, board member of the St. Joe Library, founding member of Missouri Western's Foundation Clock Tower Society, founding member of the board of directors of the Community Foundation of Northwest Missouri, and as patron and donor to most St. Joseph art organizations over the years. That's impressive, guys.
And are we live now? Can you all hear? How about everybody in the back? Is that good? Louder? Okay, AV people, where are we? Okay. Yes, it is. That will definitely have an impact. All right, how's that? No? There you go. We got Joe's?
Joe, can we hear you? You try talking, Joe.
I'm sorry.
Joe, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you fine.
All right, that's all that matters. Well, I'm delighted to be here at Missouri Western to once again celebrate Entrepreneurship Week. And we have an amazing and a very humble person as our guest speaker today, Mr. Joe Gray. Joe is truly a treasure to not only our community, but as you will learn today, to our country as well. His life and his career experiences are vast, and he has touched the lives of many interesting and important people along the way. A few of those experiences pay great dividends even today in our community. So please join me, if you would, in welcoming Joe Gray. Now, Joe, I understand that there are some family members here today, as well as some of your co-management team from Gray Manufacturing. And if you wouldn't mind, the folks that are here, Pete and Stacy and Mitch, as well as the team that's here, stand and be recognized as well. Well, as you can imagine, it's almost impossible to capsulize Joe's incredible, almost 99-year life in a 30-minute address. But in the interest of time, I'm going to go over some of the highlights of the early years, and then I'm going to have Joe come back and tell us some of his great life experiences and the stories about them. Well, Joe was born in 1922, which he's got a big anniversary coming up next year, so everyone can add up and figure out. He grew up right here in St. Joseph to Laura and Joseph Gray. His childhood home was located at 24th and Pacific Street, where it still stands today, by the way. He attended St. Patrick's Elementary School and the former Christian Brothers High School, where he graduated in the class of 1940. As Annette said, after Joe graduated, he enrolled here, actually. It was then St. Joseph Junior College, but obviously became Missouri Western State University, and spent 2 years there doing his core studies. In addition to being a student at St. Joseph Junior College, Joe worked for the St. Joseph News Press and earned a little spending money along the way. After completing the core studies at St. Joseph JC, Joe enrolled at the University of Kansas. So Joe, I'm curious, you lived less than a mile away from St. Joseph Junior College, and then all of a sudden you're headed off to KU. How'd you get back and forth between KU and St. Joseph?
Well, I didn't do very much back and forth. I had a bicycle that my father put a gasoline washing machine motor on the back. And I used to ride that thing back and forth to KU. It would go about 30 miles an hour, and downhill especially. And I didn't come home very obviously very often, because that was quite a trip.
I assume you pedaled too along the way.
No more than I had to.
Well, Joe spent 5 semesters at KU and received a Bachelor of Science in Aeronautical Engineering, the first such graduating class in that discipline that KU had to offer. Joe, at the time of your graduation, the war was still going on. It was getting close to the end, but you'd had a deferment, which meant Joe had to put in his time in the military. So if you would, could you tell us what your first assignment was in the U.S. military?
I got a draft call, and so I went to the Navy and talked with them, and I joined the Navy because I thought they didn't march. That was one of my first mistakes. I made a lot of them. But anyhow, when I got in the Navy and they found out that I had an aeronautical degree, they made an officer out of me. I didn't even, I went through boot camp, but I didn't have to go through any training or anything. And I didn't know an admiral from a bull moose unless he had antlers. And so anyhow, they sent me to the Annapolis, on the Annapolis campus. They had a engineering development company that they developed products and various other things, and so they sent me to that place to start out. Well, I wound up in rocketry and jet propulsion devices. And as a result of that, I spent about the next 7 or 8 years in aerospace type engineering for guided missiles and for aircraft. And that was a great experience. It was very heady stuff, because when you were just fresh out of school, we had disciplines that were not available in the industry. And so I wound up getting jobs that ordinarily would be middle-aged engineers when I was just a snotty-nosed kid. And anyhow, I had guys that were far senior to me that worked under me. But anyhow, my first rocket and jet work was at the engineering station there in Annapolis. And I got acquainted there with Bob Truax, who was a lifelong friend of mine after that. I don't know if any of you have heard of him, but we stayed in contact for years after I got out, and he was just a good friend. But this guy was probably number 2 after Dr. Robert Goddard in the importance of his knowledge of rockets. He started out as a young kid studying them and playing with them, and he had a lot of interesting tales. I don't know how long I've got to talk.
Well, Joe, let's follow that a little bit. And for those of you that don't know Dr. Goddard, in the late 30s, he was our pioneering person who believed in liquid fuel to fuel rockets. Unfortunately, our government did not believe in them, so they scrapped the program and never gave him an opportunity to do anything. But later in life, Joe had the opportunity to meet a former Nazi SS officer named Wernher von Braun. And some of you may know that name because Wernher was the person who developed the Saturn V rocket, which was the rocket that carried all of our Apollo missions to the moon and beyond. But could you tell us how that meeting took place?
Well, at that time I was working as a technical advisor to the Department of Ordnance in the Army. The general in charge of that was General Toftoy, and he had 5 advisors in different disciplines: aeronautical, airframes, guidance and control, and that sort of thing, power plant. Well, I was his power plant advisor, and he is the one who brought Wernher von Braun over to the country. He told me that when he was a lieutenant colonel in Berlin, and he was a career Army person. He went through West Point, and he had this security group brought a guy into him or into his office and said, "This man, he is Wernher von Braun, and he wants to talk with you." So through the interpreter, he said, "I want to go to America, not to Russia." And the guy couldn't speak a word of English at the time, and so he kept saying, "I want to go." He said, "I have 45 scientists with me, 3 truckloads of classified documents on rocketry and jet propulsion, and I forget what else he had, but anyhow, he had all the equipment he needed, and he kept saying, "I don't want to go to Russia." Well, the general told me that he said the Russians were coming in on Berlin at that time, and they were close enough to the target that I could hear their guns in the distance. He said, so I knew they'd be here within a day or 2. And he said, I didn't have the luxury of following Army procedures to get that permission to bring him over here. And he said, I just thought he was too important a person to allow to go to Russia. And so he said, I kidnapped him. literally, that's what it was. And I brought him his, he said, I commandeered an airplane and brought them all over to the U.S. And he said, I expected to be court-martialed and it would kill my Army career. And he said, just as I expected, they filed a court-martial. And he said that some top general, he said, I don't even know who he was now, but he said he had some clout. And he said he came in and when he learned about that, and he said, I never knew a general that knew how to use language as crude as he was using, but he told them everything in the book. And he told them to get that blankety blank thing straightened out or else they wouldn't know me. And anyhow, he said somehow it just disappeared. The suit was dropped.
Well, that's interesting. You know, for those of you that don't understand what Wernher von Braun meant to Germany and the Nazis, you need to see the British World War II Museum in London. And on display, they have several of the V-1 and V-2 rockets that they rained in on London just about every day. And it was Wernher von Braun who was the architect of that. So as the war was concluding in Europe, it was a great move to get that guy on our side because it meant we landed on the moon first, ultimately. But how was it that you got to meet Wernher von Braun?
Well, I got to meet him when I started working for the Department of Ordnance, because von Braun, having come over here with the general's kidnapping, headed up his organization down in Alabama to build weapons under his office. And when von Braun, his focus was on the rocketry and air-breathing jet propulsion devices. So I had to be the advisor that was involved in counseling the general on when he would get bids related to R&D work on things, judge the qualification of the company that was putting the bids in to see if they had the technical ability, the mechanical ability, the financial, and all the other stuff that they need. And I did that for quite a while with it, and von Braun, since I was the propulsion man, he came up about almost every month in our office, and we visited, and I got to know him pretty well. He one time he came in and said, well, he said, I think I'm finally Americanized. You know? And I said, well, how's that, Wernher? And he said, well, he said, I was on business in Hamburg last week, and the guy came over to my table and asked me what I wanted. I told him a hamburger, and he didn't even know what it was. Anyhow, he spoke English with no accent at all, which I was impressed by. You'd never think he was anything other than being born American.
Interesting. Well, I understand at some point you had an office at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. How did that come to be?
That's where we were located I was there 2.5 years.
And
in fact, on the raid on the Pentagon where that plane crashed into it, it crushed my office. Well, I'm glad I wasn't there.
we are too, by the way. Well, at some point in time, you made a decision to leave the U.S. military and return to St. Joseph and start a company. What year was that? And give us a
1952. That's an interesting thing that I started thinking philosophically. I was 28 years old, and I thought, boy, I don't want to look back at my life and think I only worked on things to destroy. I'd rather do things. I know that's important that you have weapons and all like that, but I didn't want to be involved in my sole work, so I'd rather work on something that was for construction or improvements of things. And I went in and talked to General Toftoy and told him about it. I talked to my dad first, and he had a one employee thing that he just tinkered around with, and he said, well, he said, you know, I know quite, he spent about 40 years in the tire and mechanical repair business, light mechanical repairs, like mufflers, tailpipes, spark plugs, and that sort of thing. And he said, I know what the equipment that they have in there does and won't do. And he said they need a lot of better designed stuff. And he said, I know what it is. And he said, you could maybe design it, and we could together we could make grow a company. And I told General Toftoy this, and he said, well, he said, you know, sometimes those things work out, sometimes they don't. But he said, if you do decide to do that, I hope yours works out. But he said, if it doesn't, he said, I don't know how long I'm going to be here, but he said, if I'm still here, you come back and hang your hat up, and I've got a job. And so that made it a lot easier to take the chance to break off.
So you had a backup plan.
Yeah.
Do you recall how much capital you originally invested to start the business?
Arguably, say $15,000 or something, and close to that, 13 to 15 would be my best guess.
And I know there's a lot of bankers in the audience, but do you remember how you acquired the $15,000? How did you come up with the $15,000?
Well, that was all of our assets that we had to put in it, and the value of our cars and things like that. So we didn't have it as cash.
Okay. You know, your approach of understanding your customer's needs, meaning when I say customer, I'm talking about the actual person who utilizes the equipment that you make, was really been a hallmark of your company. What inspired you and your father to take that approach?
Well, I would say that there were several things that inspired us, but the most important one was that we had 12 competitors at that time in America who manufactured the type of equipment that we were thinking of getting into. And they all sold through warehouse distributors and jobbers. And they looked at those people as being their customer. They didn't look at the guy in the plant that had the grease under his fingernails that did the work using their equipment. They didn't even know what he thought of their equipment. And they didn't carry spare parts. They really, all they did is try to keep their jobbers and distributors happy. Well, when we got our first jack design, excuse me, my mind goes blank once in a while. It's like a 100-year-old house. It has an electrical system that blows fuses out and all, never had it. Anyhow.
A lot of us know how you feel.
Forget where I was.
Well, let's talk about some of the product design, because you guys are really second to none in your industry in terms of the quality of your products. You're about ready now, I guess a few months away, to celebrate the company's 70th anniversary.
That's correct.
Along the way, thank you. Along the way, you and many of your team members have created some really interesting industry innovations. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of the patents and the number of patents that your company has contributed?
Well, Step, or somebody that would know the number, I don't, it's around 25 or something like that.
Somebody once told me it was close to 40. I don't know if that's closer, Sted. Higher? More than 50 patents. That's fantastic. I also heard a story recently that one of your longtime customers decided to return their jack and give it back to you. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
That's one jack I was glad to return. This guy was an OK rubber welder. I don't know if any of you ever remember hearing of that company. They were a chain of retreaders and recappers for car and truck tires. And this guy was one of them. He bought this jack years ago before we were well known. And anyhow, he sent a letter in saying that he was closing his business and was liquidating the tools and equipment he had. And he was looking to his records to see what he paid for the different things. And he said, I realized when I looked at that jack that he said I'd used it for 35 years, every day that I'd worked. And he said, I never did anything to it, never even oiled it or never had a minute's problem with it. He said, I got my money's worth out of it, so I'm going to send it back to you prepaid, and if you don't want it, throw it in the trash pile or give it to somebody that does. So it's now in our front lobby.
That's fantastic.
That's quite a compliment on your product.
It sure is.
Anyhow, I think that covers it enough.
Well, during the 1960s, I understand you were elected to the board of directors of the Morris Plan Bank.
Yes.
And some of us older people in the room will remember the Morris Plan. It was located just across from City Hall on Frederick Street for many, many years. And Mr. Morris had founded that institution and had roughly 100 offices around the country, including one right here in St. Joseph. And the purpose of it was to assist middle-class customers who normally wouldn't qualify for a traditional bank loan. And Joe, I believe that they asked you to be on the board, and at some point in time, you had a very interesting loan request that came across your board. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, we had a gentleman who had worked in construction work all his life and was very highly respected, Bill Herzog. A lot of you probably knew him. Anyhow, he had resigned from land construction company where he had worked for many years, and he earned a fabulous reputation, and he emphasizing that he did earn it, he worked hard. And anyhow, he said that he'd like to borrow $200,000. And we explained to him, well, Bill, we don't loan that kind of. We loan people for buying cars or just small house things or whatever. He said, why don't you go to a bank? He said, I've been to every bank in town, and none of them will give me a loan. Well, we all knew him and knew him as a good, reliable person and a good worker. And he, another blank spot, I'm sorry.
Well, I understand that he was pretty reliable in terms of paying back that loan.
Oh, yeah. Well, anyhow, it happened that the three of the board members were the biggest three shareholders in Morris Plan here. And they all knew him. And they had over half of the Morris Plan total stock that they owned. They said, let's give it to him. And he said he wanted it for 90 days. He said, I've got a contract offer with Red to do some track work for them. He said, those guys don't know anything He said, it's amazing that the train's running on, but anyhow, he said, I'll pay you back in 3 months. Well, the rest of the story is we loaned it to him. He paid us back in 2 months. He had it that much ahead. He said, I was going to go into business making highways and things of that sort of concrete. He said, well, I'm not going to waste my time on that. This is a gold mine. So that's how I got into the business.
It's an amazing story. Now, can you imagine, folks, had you not made that loan, how many people are affected by not making that capital an opportunity for somebody? And I know we have a number of bankers in the room. Could all the bankers stand up, please? Most appear to be hiding right now. But I have it on good authority. We have some folks from Nottoway Valley Bank here today. Big hand for Nottoway Valley Bank. I think someone mentioned we had someone from Commerce Bank, maybe more than someone, maybe a table. Commerce Bank, where are you? Obviously, this is the shyest group in the room. And last but certainly not least, U.S. Bank. I think they're well represented here today as well. I only make such an emphasis on this because as we try to create more and more entrepreneurs like Chris Lamb and like Bill Herzog, we need lenders. And we need lenders that can recognize talent and recognize a great business plan and then let them grow. And those jobs that are created and the commerce that comes with it will just raise this community up even higher. So thank you for your patience on that in my little preaching.
You know, one thing I'd like to say while it's in my mind, if it doesn't slip out again, is that I'm probably the only guy in this room, or gal or anybody else, that never had a single business course in college or high school, not any business course. It was all engineering and technical stuff. And I made a lot of mistakes, and some of them are pretty good size, but some of them weren't. And you learn a lot from a mistake if you analyze it and figure out what you should have done or could have done, and you don't do it again. So I got a pretty good solid footing by making enough mistakes to get them corrected that I can finally stand up. And boy, that's a good feeling. That's a big thing to me in an entrepreneur. If you want to be successful, you have to find a need, and it should be in something that you enjoy working in. And you're going to need partners to go with you. You're going to need suppliers. You're going to need professional people that consult with you, and on like that. And so you make, and above all, you need customers. And the customer, if he's not satisfied with you, he's your boss. He's the whole company's boss. If he fires you, what you can do by buying a competitor's product instead of yours, and if enough of them do that, you're out of business. So we always tell our people when we hire them that you don't work for the company, you work in the company for the customer. He is your boss and my boss and everybody else's. And so you want to keep that guy happy. If he's happy, he'll continue to buy your products, and if he's not, he'll fire you and buy your competitors. You're out of business.
That's well said. That's very well said.
And we share profits with our employees that work there, and so they learn that if they keep the customer happy, their bonuses get a little bigger. And that's an important thing, but you have to have, your suppliers have to win, and if you want a long-term relationship, you have to make everybody that you deal with benefit in some way or another. And some people, they feel like the big companies, they feel like they get you down. Well, I knew of a company, well, I won't mention who they were, but they gave a guy an award because he bankrupted a supplier by making him deal down.
Do you remember the name of the award? Well, you had, in addition to the connection with Bill Herzog, your chief engineer, Frank Frudenthal, was with you a number of years, and that connection also paid some big dividends for St. Joseph. So could you tell us about that?
Frank, when we hired Frank, he and his wife took about 2 months to make up their mind whether they wanted a job or not. And I offered him a salary that was almost double what he was making down there. And because I knew him and I knew how good he was. And anyhow, he and Sally came up here and they didn't like the school system, they didn't like this, they didn't like that, they found, but they liked some things. And anyhow, I finally told him, I said, Frank, I need a chief engineer, and if you can't take it, I'll respect that, but I've got to hire somebody. He said, well, give us a little bit more time. Well, they took another week or two, and finally said they'd come. Well, the rest of the story is, I told you I made a lot of mistakes. This was a big one, not Frank. The big thing was that I'd tried a marketing thing where I tested the payments that we were having on, we had time payments, how they were stacking up and behaving, whether we had credit ratings or not. Once it called in, we didn't know anything good or bad about them. So I just started, I put 100 orders out, just accepting them blindly, just to see how they'd be. And they were just as good in payments, no more loss than people that we had checked Dun and Bradstreet and all the other things. And so I started putting more of them out. Well, I got enough of them out that we had about $2 million in bad credit at that time. And so it was so strong that I had to lay off the engineering department, the marketing department, and just gobs of people to correct for my big mistake. Well, we finally got the thing worked out, but Frank took a job up in Michigan, working for a supplier of plastic molding for automobiles. And anyhow, I talked to him every now and then, and he said that he decided he was going to leave that company and go somewhere else. And I said, well, I'd sure like to have you back, but anyhow, this guy that owns, or the big owner of the company.
The Alabama Technology Company?
Yeah, Altec.
Altec.
The guy, I knew him, I'd met him and knew him just to say hello to him, and he called me and said, you know how to reach Frank? And I said, yeah. And I said, will you give me his phone number? And so I knew Frank I wouldn't ordinarily do that, but I knew Frank would be interested. And anyhow, I gave him the number, and I said, what do you want to talk to Frank for? And he said, well, I've talked to all my suppliers and they won't listen to me. And he said, I'm going to start up making those things myself and put some of my suggestions to work. And he said, I know Frank, and he's worked in that sort of thing before. And he said that I'd like to hire him if I could get him to come with me. And I said, well, I think it'd be a good deal. Well, he called Frank, and Frank talked with him and said, well, where are you going to put this place? And he said, well, I've got a big building down here. He said, I think it'd be maybe a good place to start the business. But he said, I don't really care where that is. And he said, Frank said, well, if I put it in St. Joe, if I came to you, would you let me put it in St. Joe? He said, sure, I don't care. He said, okay, I'll take it. And so he and Sally had fallen in love with the town, and they wanted to come back, and they came back, and they've done a very good job for him, and as they did for everybody they worked for.
Kind of interesting how a little connection goes a long way in really lifting a community. Well, tell me this, you mentioned Mr. Robert Truex earlier, and I've done a little research on him. At some point in time, Evel Knievel came to him and had an idea to put a rocket on a motorcycle and jump over the Snake River in Idaho. How did that take place?
Well, Bob Truex, as I was telling you, he was probably the number 2 man in rocketry in America. And anyhow, a very competent and very responsible guy. But when Knievel came to him, he agreed to do it. And anyhow, he got it all designed, and he called me one time about a week or 2 before the thing was the jump was to occur. And he said, Joe, I need some help. And I said, Bob, you've forgotten more about rocketry than I have. He said, oh, it's not that. He said, I can't convince this guy to let me put a brace behind his elbow where he holds the deadman switch. On the rocket, when they do that kind of thing, they would put a manual switch there that he had to hold on to, and if he passed out, it would shut it off, and because his hand would just fall away from it, and then it would pop a parachute out and land him. Well, this had all those features in it, and he said, I tried to talk him into it, and I said, well, what's he saying? He said, Bob, you're a scientist, and I don't know anything about your science. He said, but I'm an athlete, and you don't know anything about athletes. He said, I know my ability, and you know yours. So just leave it like it is. And he said, well, I'm afraid you're going to get killed or whatever. He said, I'll be all right. Well, when he took off, and what happened when the rocket first came on, it gave him 2.3 G's, that's twice, 2.3 times his weight was pulling back on it. And it just happens like that. It doesn't slowly build up. And when he just got off the thing, and it hit him, and his hand let go, and it wouldn't turn back on once it had gone off. And so here he is, falling down in a canyon, and he bumped off of the walls, and he said, I didn't think I'd ever see him alive again. And he told me the next morning I talked to him the next morning. He said that when they brought him up out of the canyon, he had several bones broken because he was just bouncing from one rock to another, and it was made to land on a flat landing. And anyhow, I said, was he conscious? He said, yeah. He looked up at me, and he said he was just bleeding all over. And he said, well, I sure can't say you didn't tell me so. And he said, boy, I was relieved. Relieved that he was alive.
There's a number of people that are a lot younger that didn't get to see Evel Knievel. But for those of us who did, it was kind of an interesting time. If you remember ABC Wide World of Sports, he still holds the record for the 7 top episodes of that show. And I know that Frank Gifford and some of the other guys that were part of that, it was a big deal to him, but he also holds the record for the most broken bones of any athlete in the world as well. Well, Annette has given me the sign that we're out of time now. So I'm hopeful that everybody enjoyed this discussion as much as I did, because it
I'd like to tell you one more important thing. The great company is, I hope this isn't not skipping out of the box, but the great company is now getting into a companion business where we're going to be entrepreneurs in the diesel roadside service for heavy trucks and buses. And we have one of them now, one of them in Lincoln, Nebraska, and one of them in Alexandria, South Carolina. And we're working on a third one now, and we hope to get up to a couple of dozen or so. We have 3 executives in the company who spent 10 years in diesel maintenance of their careers before they came to us. And so we have good knowledge base within our company. And we also have a good reputation in the trucking industry, so we expect it to be a major booster. We'll use these things also as sales areas, servicing areas for repairs or parts if our stuff needs them, and just they'll service in many ways and serve the customers. So we're very pleased with what we've done so far.
Well, that's fantastic. Congratulations to all of you. As we wrap up, I would tell you that your life has been really a living testament of our Midwest values, as well as hard work and dedication, but also to the amazing opportunities that our country has to offer.
You've done a pretty good job by yourself.
Okay, so I had a few breaks. But I was trying to come up with a quote that would summarize your life, and I really struggled with it. But then I read a book by Tom Brokaw, The Greatest Generation. The quote is this. It says, "They came of age during the Great Depression and the Second World War and went on to build modern America. Men and women whose everyday lives of duty, honor, achievement, and courage gave us the world we have today." Mr. Joker.